Okay, and say thank you again to Casey from Flavor Labs for coming and doing this cooking presentation with us. And we look forward to it. And please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linda. And thank you for having me. As Linda said, my name is Casey, and I'm the founder of the Flavor Labs, which is a kids cooking studio. We actually have a 2,200 square foot studio in Norwood, New Jersey. And our plans were to open up, over a year ago, but things obviously got delayed. So we started out just doing virtual classes, not really having any idea what we were doing or what I was doing, because I had never done a virtual cooking class before, just like many of you have never taken a virtual cooking class before. Now it's kind of the new norm, and it's a lot of fun, and got lots of experience under our belts, particularly with Debbie and the young adult crew at the library. So that's been a lot of fun. So we do primarily classes with children of all ages. We do mommy and me types of classes. We do teen classes, but we have been doing a lot lately, a lot of adult classes in the evening. So I actually did this class. I was telling Linda earlier, I did this sweet potato gnocchi class last night as a corporate event. And I'm glad to see that a lot of you are actually cooking along, because I did this for about 20 people last night, and there was only one person that was cooking along with me. So I was like, all right, I hope you all try this over the weekend and send me some pictures of your food, because I need to make sure that this actually works. But anyway, I love this particular recipe, and I like to do it virtually because not everything translates well to a virtual sort of class. But I like sweet potato gnocchi for a few reasons. Number one, it doesn't really have a lot of ingredients. So it's relatively simple from that perspective. But the other thing that I really like about this is that it can sound intimidating, and people will be reluctant to make this on their own, many people. But when we actually walk through this together, you'll realize that it's not as complicated as you might have expected. And we'll all master this together. One way or another, we're gonna get through this recipe today, and it's gonna come out great, and you're gonna be surprised at how easy this was. And I'm pretty sure when you're done, this is something that you'll come back to again. And you'll see that it's easy to be intimidated in the kitchen sometimes, but hopefully this class will help kind of ease that. Just like we do with our kids' classes, this is like an intimidation-free zone. We try to sort of demystify the kitchen, because I think a lot of people can be afraid of using certain ingredients or certain methods. So hopefully at the end of this, you'll all have learned something. And if nothing else, you'll have a good dinner to cook by the end of the class. All right, so just a couple things before we get started. Hopefully for those of you that are cooking along have already baked your sweet potatoes. So I've got 2 medium-sized sweet potatoes. I know referring to the size of a sweet potato can be tricky, because a sweet potato can be this big or this big. So really the general guide here is you want about 1.5 cups of sweet potato flesh once you scoop it out. And we'll come back to that, but hopefully you've all at least baked your sweet potatoes so the insides are really nice and soft, because we're really just gonna be using a fork to mash them up. No crazy like mashing tools or food or potato ricers, just really simple tools. So if your potatoes are nice and soft and cooled, they'll actually come out of the skins really easily. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we're gonna be making the pasta dough, then we're gonna be boiling it to cook it, and then we're gonna be pan frying it to brown the outside. So it's gonna give a really nice crispy texture to an otherwise really creamy and soft interior. So what I like to do when we first get started, once my dough is ready, I wanna be able to boil it right away. So I'm actually gonna I have a pot here of water, which I'm gonna just turn the flame on underneath, probably on a medium light, just to get the water heated up so that when I need it boiling, it will be ready. So if it starts to boil early, I'll just turn the light down a little bit and keep it simmering. That way, once we're done with the dough, the water is gonna be ready for us to boil the pasta right away. So you don't have to sit there waiting for 10 more minutes. I've got salted water here. I always salt my water before I use it to make any sort of pasta. So I'm gonna turn that water on right now. And then the other thing.
What kind of pan is that? Like, is it like a saucepan? Is it a
saucepan? I mean, if you're gonna be making a lot of gnocchi, you might want something bigger. If you're gonna just do it in batches or maybe only do a portion of it, you don't need a pot that's as big. And then the other thing I have here is just a non-stick pan or skillet, because that's gonna be what I'm using to brown or crisp the outsides of the gnocchi. And then that's also the pan I'm gonna use to finish it off in a garlic and butter sauce. And I learned the hard way that doing it in a regular pan that's not non-stick is really, really difficult to clean. So browning the gnocchi, it sticks a lot if you don't use a nonstick pan. And then making the sauce and adding Parmesan cheese into that pan, it's gonna take like days for it to soak and come clean. So I learned that the hard way. So learn from me, use a nonstick pan if you're gonna be browning the pasta and making the sauce. All right, so unless anybody has any questions, I'm gonna just jump right in. Is everybody ready to go? All right, so I'll take the silence as a yes, because it's a good thing. All right, so like I said, if your sweet potatoes are nice and cooled, you can take a fork, a knife, open them up. I'm using my hands because you'll notice once you open up a cooled sweet potato, it actually comes right off the skin. You can almost just like squeeze it out. So this is really nice and soft, which is gonna be really easy to squish, that's a technical cooking term, to squish with my fork, or mash up. And you might even just need to take a utensil just to kind of scrape the potato off the skin. But if you've cooked them all the way through, this part should be really easy. And that will also make the next part really easy, which is getting a nice, smooth, almost like a paste of that sweet potato right in your bowl. And don't worry, if you've got some really dark pieces, dark bits of potato in there, that's just caramelized. There's a lot of sugar in sweet potatoes. They're called sweet potatoes, right? And sometimes when they're baking, if you've poked some holes in the potato, that sugar will kind of seep through and caramelize a bit. But don't worry, it's not burnt, it's not gonna taste bad. It'll actually add some nice flavor to the dough itself. So don't worry about any of those darker spots. You can feel free to use those in this dough. All right, so I've mangled my potato and I've got about 1.5 cups of sweet potato in my mixing bowl. And everything today is going to be blended in this bowl, literally just using a fork. Don't need anything crazy here. I'm just gonna get a little towel for my hands because I always get them dirty. Okay, now before I add any other ingredients, I'll just tell you what I'm gonna be using just to make sure you've got things ready. And I'll take this out of the fridge. One of my favorite things about this is the use of ricotta cheese. So this is whole milk ricotta. It's really creamy, really rich, and it really helps to create a nice texture and adds creaminess and almost like a velvety sort of texture to this dough, which is a really nice contrast when we actually crispy outside, because then you'll have a crispy outside and a kind of creamy, velvety interior. So the ricotta cheese is going to be a really great way to add to that texture. So ricotta cheese and Parmesan cheese. We're going to do two different kinds of cheese in the dough today. And then an egg, which is just going to act as a binder and kind of hold it all together. And then a little bit of salt and pepper. And then, of course, flour. Flour is going to be that really, the finishing agent that's going to hold this all together and turn it into a dough. All right, so I've got my sweet potato in my bowl, and I'm just going to take my fork, and I'm going to mash this up until it's pretty smooth. It's almost going to look kind of like baby food, right? You don't want to see any huge chunks in it, because those chunks then will be in your dough, and you'll see those pieces when you start to roll it out and you knead it. So to the best that you can with a fork, if your potato's a little bit, if you haven't cooked it quite enough, you may want to use a potato masher or something a little bit more powerful than a fork. But if yours is cooked all the way through, you should just be able to run your fork right through it, and it should be nice and smooth. So I pretty much got all those lumps out of there. And by the way, there are, I remember reading, I want to say like 30 or 50 different varieties of sweet potatoes. Sometimes when I bake them and I open them up, I'm always surprised at the color. Sometimes it's like a light yellow, sometimes it's a purpley color, sometimes it's just what you'd expect, like a nice orange color. So if yours looks slightly different, don't worry about it. It's going to work out just fine. All right, so I've got my mashed sweet potato. Now I'm gonna add my 2 cheeses and my egg. So I'm gonna start with my ricotta cheese, ricotta, whatever you wanna call it. I don't wanna offend any Italians by calling it ricotta cheese, but it's just, it rolls off the tongue a lot easier for us non-Italians. So I'm gonna add in a 1/2 cup of this whole milk cheese right into the bowl with the mashed up sweet potato. All right, I'm using a 1/4 cup to measure here, so I'm just gonna do 2 of these. And I'm literally just scooping it out of my container. You'll notice along the way, I'm gonna probably do things that seem like shortcuts. I like to minimize the number of dishes that I get dirty when I'm cooking, which I'm sure many of you could probably appreciate, because I feel like I spend half my day cleaning the kitchen. So the less dishes, the less mess I have at the end of the day, the better I feel. All right, so you could use a spoon to fill your measuring cup and level it if you really wanted to get crazy, but I don't really think that's necessary because we're not baking here. We don't need super precision. All right, I'm just gonna stick this back in the fridge. So I've got a half of a cup of ricotta cheese, and now I'm gonna add my Parmesan cheese. So the Parmesan, I'm only gonna use a quarter cup. This has a pretty strong flavor. So this is gonna add some saltiness to the pasta. It's gonna add a little bit of moisture as well, because believe it or not, Parmesan cheese, though it feels dry and crumbly, still has a decent amount of moisture in it. So it's gonna add texture and flavor to this gnocchi. And we're also gonna use this, I'm gonna use this at the end to finish off my butter sauce and toss the pasta in. So this will come back into play soon. So far I've got my mashed up sweet potatoes. I added a half a cup of ricotta cheese, and then I just added a quarter cup of Parmesan cheese. Now Parmesan is one of those things you can get it grated, you can get it shredded, you can do it fresh yourself. Whatever you have on hand, whatever works for you, go for it. I mean, when I'm making things like this, unless I'm having the Parmesan cheese like grating on its own, I tend to go for like, not the, 5-year aged or 24-month age. It doesn't need to be super aged, super potent from a Parmesan perspective. But sometimes I'll use a nicer Parmesan cheese to grate on top when I'm gonna taste it by itself. When I'm mixing it in, I don't use the highest quality Parmesan cheese that I have, just because it gets a little bit lost in all the flavors. So I don't think it's necessarily worth using that, that extra ingredient, the extra sort of special one. But I do like to use that one when I'm grating on top. All right, so I've got my ricotta cheese, my Parmesan cheese, my sweet potato. Now I'm going to add 1 egg. And Debbie knows when I say this all the time with the kids, if you're not comfortable in your egg cracking skills, crack the egg in a separate bowl, make sure there's no shell, make sure your egg looks okay, and then, yeah, Debbie's got it, and then add it to your bowl. If you're comfortable in your egg cracking abilities, you can crack the egg right into your bowl. You may see me fishing out some shell. Maybe I'll do it okay, I don't know. But the reason we have the kids always crack their eggs in a separate bowl is because not all of them are as proficient at cracking eggs as their parents are. And every now and then they get some shell. So I'm gonna crack mine right in and cross my fingers. Yeah, no shell. I did it. All right, so we've got egg, 2 types of cheeses, and sweet potatoes in here. The last thing I'm gonna add is salt and pepper. Now, you could do this to taste whatever you think might work. I'm gonna do 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. You can alter those up or down depending, you really might love pepper, so you might wanna do more than 1/4. You might wanna be watching your salt, maybe you wanna reduce it. Up to you. I'm gonna use 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt and 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And a lot of times when I use black pepper, like normally when I'm just like cooking and I add like a little bit of pepper for flavor, I'll just use my pepper cracker, pepper mill, and just grind the pepper. But when I have to measure out a certain amount, going back to me being really lazy every now and then, I like to just use ground pepper because it's just a lot easier when you can just pour it right into a measuring spoon instead of sitting there and then grinding it for like 5 minutes and then scooping it out. But
And
again,
did you use kosher salt?
yes, I always use kosher salt, but this is not coarse kosher salt. This is just regular kosher salt. But yes, absolutely. All right, so I see a bunch of people starting to mix. So if you're good and you've got these ingredients.
You said 3/4, I'm sorry, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
1/4 teaspoon of pepper, you got it. So I've got 1 egg, salt, pepper, the 2 cheeses, and my sweet potatoes in here. I'm just gonna mix this together now. I'm gonna make it nice and smooth. And I'm gonna stop mixing because you don't wanna go crazy here. You don't wanna really overwork the sweet potato too much, but I'm gonna stop mixing once I no longer see streaks of the cheese in my bowl. So it's gonna kind of become a nice uniform color. That's when I'm gonna be done mixing. So you'll notice it's pretty light and creamy right now. I mean light in color. Probably feels a little heavy from all that cheese, but it's gonna be delicious. All right, so I'm gonna stop mixing, and this is what mine looks like. Doesn't look like very much yet, and quite frankly, once we roll it out and cut it and boil it, it still doesn't look like very much. It kind of has a pale like color to it that doesn't really jump out, which is why I really love to finish it in the pan, because when you brown it, then it really adds a nice element of color and texture. And I like to throw in some basil, depending on the season, I'll throw basil or sage, just to add a little bit of color, but also a nice sort of seasonal flavor to that finishing sauce. All right, so I've got the bowl here with all of my ingredients. And now comes the flour. So I would say of all the things that we're gonna do, these next couple steps are probably the most challenging. Not because it's hard to do, but because it's gonna take a little bit of sort of finessing to figure out how much of the flour you need to add. So generally, it's gonna be anywhere between 2 and 2.5 cups of flour. So it's gonna depend on the size of your sweet potatoes, the moisture content in your sweet potatoes, the moisture content of your cheese. There's always different factors that are gonna drive how much flour you need to add. So I usually add 1/2 cup at a time, give it a stir, and when I get to just about 2 cups, when I mix it, it's gonna start to get pretty stiff. That's when I turn it out onto my table, onto a floured surface, and start to slowly knead it, and if it still feels sticky, I'll slowly add a little bit more flour. So we'll walk through all that together, but just so you know, it's gonna be anywhere between 2 and 2.5 cups of flour that we're going to add now. And I'm gonna start 1/2 of a cup at a time. So here's my potato, cheese, egg mixture, and I'm just adding 1/2 of a cup of flour, and I'm gonna give it a good mix. And the first couple additions of flour, they're pretty easy. It gets absorbed really quickly because right now, you know, there's a lot of moisture in that bowl. So I'm gonna mix this till the flour pretty much disappears. All right. Looking pretty good. So most of that flour is gone. I'm gonna add my second 1/2 of a cup of flour. I think my water's boiling, so I'm just gonna turn the flame down just a bit. All right, so I added my second 1/2 of a cup right into the bowl, and I'm slowly mixing it in as it gets incorporated. And you notice with each addition, it's gonna get progressively sort of thicker and a little bit harder to mix, which makes sense, right? Because we're making a dough, and the more flour we add, the stiffer this is going to get. All right, but still it's absorbing pretty quickly, and it's still relatively easy to kind of mix together. So I've added 1 cup so far. I'm gonna do another 1/2 of a cup, and then probably 1 more before I start to work with my hands. Because if you were to try and use your hands before you add about 2 cups, you're gonna be covered in sweet potatoes and it's gonna be super sticky. And if you turn that out onto your counter, you're gonna be scratching and scraping that off your table for a while. So let's make sure we get enough flour in there before we start to work on the table with our hands. Oopsie. All right, so far I've added 1.5 cups, and I can see it's starting to get pretty stiff. Starting to get a little bit more challenging to sort of mix and get all incorporated. And you'll notice it takes longer each time for that flour to get absorbed into the dough. And at this point, it's not really stirring so much anymore. I'm actually using my fork to press the pieces together and kind of turning it over and pressing the flour in, because it's getting thick enough where I can't really stir it. So I'm almost folding it and pressing it together with this fork. So I'm gonna do 1 more addition of flour here, 1 more 1/2 a cup. I'm gonna mix it in as best as I can. And once I do that, I'm gonna turn it out right onto the table. But I'm gonna make sure I put some flour on the counter before I do that, because I don't want this sticking. All right, so far I've added 2 cups in total. I did a 1/2 of a cup 4 times. And mine's getting pretty stiff. Mine's getting pretty sort of doughy at this point. So I don't think there's much more I'm gonna be able to do with my fork. I'm gonna have to start using my hands pretty soon. So I'm just gonna take a little bit of flour and sprinkle it on the table. And then I'm gonna turn this out. And when I say turn it out, I'm just dumping it. All right. I'm just gonna clean my fork off. And this is the part where it's gonna differ from person to person, depending on your potatoes, your cheese, all the ingredients that you're using. But now that I've turned it out on my counter, I'm just gonna use my hands to kind of pull all these loose bits together and gently start pressing it. And when you're working with dough, whether you're making cookies, pie, gnocchi, fettuccine, pizza, whatever it is, you always wanna work with the palm of your hand. And I notice when I work with kids, all they wanna do is stick their fingers in it and squeeze it. And it just gets stuck on everything and it makes a huge mess. So just a reminder, when you're kneading, when you're working with dough, use the palm of your hand. It's a lot less likely to stick to your palms when you're working it than with your fingers. And if you're worried, you could always just flour your hands a little bit, make sure they're coated, and it'll be a lot easier to work with the dough as well. All right, so just a reminder, I added about 2 cups of flour into my bowl. I mix it all together, and now I just turned it out, and I'm starting to just work the flour into my dough. Now you may need more flour than what I used. Maybe you use a little bit less and it already feels like it's getting pretty dry. But once you get to a point where your dough is getting really stiff and hard to mix, that's when you want to turn it out onto the counter and start pulling all those loose bits together with your hands. You don't want to overwork this. We're not really going to go crazy kneading the dough. All I'm doing is kind of turning it over a few times and trying to get all these loose pieces in here. Now, if this were really sticking to my hands when I was going through this part, or when I'm going through this part, I'd add a little bit more flour. But my dough today feels pretty good already. It doesn't feel sticky. So I don't think I'm going to add much more. I still have, you can see on my counter, there's still a bunch of flour here that the dough isn't picking up, which is an indication to me that it already has enough flour. If you were to put your dough down and put flour on your counter underneath it and kind of press it and lift it and it sucked up all that flour, that usually means you need that flour, right? But because mine is relatively dry on the outside, not too sticky, and it's really not picking up all that extra flour, that's a good sign for me that I don't need to add any more flour. All right, so again, I'm not going crazy kneading this. I'm just making sure I got all these sticky parts nicely floured. The dough is soft, kind of bounces back lightly when I touch it. I'm not poking my finger into it, but it feels a little bit springy to the touch. It's not going to be as elastic as, say, a pizza dough, but it should have a little bit of a bounce to it when you put your finger in it. I mean, you should be able, at this point, when you're done adding your flour, you should be able to kind of pick it up and hold it without it really sticking to your hands. How is everybody doing so far? Any questions?
And a reminder, you'd have to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Although if your hands are full of flour, you might want to just unmute yourself instead.
All right. I can't see everybody, so I'm just going to scroll through the pictures here to see how you guys look like you're doing. All right. Oh, that looks good. Some people showing their dough, thank you. Awesome. All right, so when you're ready, the next thing what we're gonna do with this is cut it into pieces. So we're gonna roll this out into like a little log or a snake, whatever you wanna call it. And we're gonna cut it from those snakes. But if you were to take this whole piece of dough and try and roll it out, you'd need like 7 lengths of a table. So I like to just cut this in pieces and work with it in pieces. Now is also the time, if you didn't wanna make this entire batch of dough, you can actually take a portion of it, work with it now, and you could freeze the rest of it. It freezes really nicely, and all you have to do is take it out and defrost it in the refrigerator. And then when you're ready to use it, let it come to room temperature or just cool, or warm up a little bit from the fridge before you start rolling it out, and it's gonna be just like fresh. All right, so I actually like to use, well, you could use a couple different things for this. If you've got one of these little like dough cutter, dough scrapers, you could use this to cut your dough. If you don't, I always like using a pizza cutter because it's a easy way to kind of cut on your counter without doing much damage. I'm going to cut my dough into about 6, I feel like I have flour on my nose, sorry. I'm going to cut my dough into about 6 pieces, and I'm going to work with each of those pieces to roll it out. Doesn't have to be precise. It could be 4 pieces, it could be 8 pieces, whatever works for you. But I'm going to just cut it almost like a pizza, but into 6 little triangles. Again, they don't have to be perfect. And I'm going to work with one at a time. And so you notice once you cut it, you've got sort of the inside exposed. It's going to be a little bit stickier than the tops that have flour. So what I always like to do is just tap it. If you've got some extra flour on your counter, you just tap those little exposed sticky sides, tap it in a little bit of flour just to make sure it's not too sticky when you start rolling it out. So you want to make sure you've got flour readily available. And we're going to roll this out until your dough is about, I'd say between 1/2 inch and 1 inch thick. It really depends on how thick you want to make your gnocchi. I usually make mine, my indication is like my finger, the thickness of my finger, which I'd say is probably about 1/2 inch. And then I'm going to cut it into little pillows. So I'll show you as I go through this. So I'm rolling mine out right now. If a little piece kind of breaks off, if it's not sticking nicely, don't worry. You can just roll that and cut it on its own. So I've got my dough and I'm rolling it into about a finger width. I've got my little piece that broke off here, which is already pretty rolled out, so that's okay. And you can use, if you've got one of these little dough cutters, you could use this, or you could just use a butter knife. And all you're gonna do once you roll your dough out is just cut these little, I like to call them little pillows. And you get these little, tiny little pillows of dough. You'll see the orange on the inside and it's nice and floured on the outside. And they're about, you know, 1 inch thick, a finger thick, and maybe 3/4 inch wide the other way. So I'm gonna try and cut my pieces as uniform as I can. You know, they'll cook together, so you want them to cook kind of consistently. And the other thing is I've got a baking sheet, and you could flour it, you could put parchment paper on it, whatever you'd like to do. But as you roll your dough and as you cut it, just have some place where you can put it in a nice even layer where they're not stacking on top of each other, because they will get kind of sticky and they'll be really hard to take apart. All right, so once your dough is ready, get it in a nice little circle, cut it into even portions, and then roll it out. So I'm gonna work on rolling, but I know some of you are still probably working through the kneading of your dough, getting it to the right consistency, making sure it's not too sticky. So keep working through that. And if you have any questions, feel free to holler, shout out your questions. I'm gonna just sit here and sort of cut up my little pieces of gnocchi. If I were really, really fancy, which I'm not, I actually have one of those little gnocchi boards. It's like a little wooden board with ridges on it. And you're supposed to just flick your finger, rub it right on there, and it comes out in this beautiful little ridged pillow, which I can't figure out how to do. I think you have to be like a 95-year-old woman in Italy in order to actually make it work. Been doing it for like 3 generations. I just can't do it that well, so I don't even try. I just cut it. And I think they look fine just like this. And they taste good. And to me, that's what's the most important. All right, so I'm going to continue to roll and cut up my little pillows in these nice little pieces, making sure I'm working on a nice floured surface because I don't want this dough to stick to my table. All right, I'm going to work with another piece now. This is nice because once you get to the point where your hands have a nice even layer and even coating of flour on them, it seems like nothing's gonna stick. So it's kind of fun at this point. You're like in the clear once you've got your hands covered. All right, how's everybody doing? Looking good, still working with the dough, some of you I see. How are you doing, Debbie? Good? All right, good.
And I remember you said originally, and I think when we were emailing back and forth, you like to use the sweet potato because
Yes.
you don't have to do anything else to it, right? Because like a regular potato, a lot of people have a regular potato gnocchi.
Yes. So it's interesting you asked that because sometimes people will try and follow this recipe. And I did a class, actually, I think it was with the Tenafly Library, and a woman substituted regular potato. And she said it came out fine, but I find it much more difficult to work with regular potatoes because they get kind of gummy very quickly. And if you don't work with them when they're very hot, when they cool off, they kind of toughen up. The thing with sweet potatoes is because of the sweetness, the sugar content, and the moisture content, they're much more forgiving. You have a lot more flexibility in working through sweet potatoes than you do in working with regular potatoes. So whenever I make my regular potato gnocchi, I actually use a potato ricer because you have to get it really, really fine. Otherwise, you can't use your fork and just mash it up like you could with a regular sweet potato. It's just not the same texture, not the same consistency. So if you think about it, if you make a baked potato, you mash it with your fork, like you can kind of break it out a little bit, but it's never going to get like baby food consistency, right? You're never going to get that really smooth pureed texture that you can get when you take a fork to a sweet potato. So that's why I really like this one. It's just easier, and you have a little bit of sort of wiggle room or flexibility when it comes to making the dough because of the moisture and the sugar content. And the other thing with regular potatoes is, you know, not everyone has a potato ricer in their house. And I feel like if someone were trying to make regular gnocchi using, you know, a fork to mash it up, I mean, I almost feel like I'd be setting somebody up to fail if they didn't have the right tools. So that's why I like this one, because it's literally just using a fork.
Have you tried cauliflower gnocchi? Have you tried to make the cauliflower gnocchi yet?
I haven't tried making it, and I haven't tried eating it yet either. I know everyone keeps telling me about all the different kinds of gnocchi they have at Trader Joe's.
Yes.
And
yes.
I might actually have a bag of it in the freezer downstairs, but I haven't tried it yet. Is it good? Have you had it?
I mean, I haven't perfected how you cook it. I kind of feel like it comes out gummy.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm interested to see your boil and sear kind of cooking method. That might be more helpful.
Yes. And this, like the gnocchi, this gnocchi is also good because it floats when it's done. So it kind of just tells you when it's ready. It kind of takes the guesswork out. It's another reason I really like it. You know, you throw it in, you wait maybe 3 minutes, it all starts coming to the surface, and then you're good to go.
Plus, there's so much nutrients in sweet potato too.
Yes.
It's
a superfood.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, it cancels out all the butter and the cheese. All right, so I'm going to stop at this. I've only used half my dough, but I'll probably just freeze what I have left because I'm going to get to the next part of this. But I'm going to pause before I do anything else. I want to see if I can see how everyone else is doing. All right, I see flour.
When you freeze it, are you just sticking it in a Ziploc bag, or how are you freezing it?
Yeah, so I'll take these pieces. I might actually just stick them back together. I'll wrap it with saran wrap, and then I'll just slide it right into a freezer bag, squeeze the air out, and put it in the freezer.
And how will you defrost it?
I'll take it out probably the day before, night before, put it in the fridge, and then when I'm ready to use it, I'll just leave it on the counter for like 15, 20 minutes just to come to room temperature a little bit. But it's actually, it works really well when you freeze it. Because I find that, especially when I do a lot of these virtual classes, I end up with so much sweet potato and gnocchi dough, and I can't possibly eat it all. So I've become really good at freezing it. Yeah, it comes out like it's like you're making it that day. It's great. All right, so I'm going to set my extra aside. And let's see, how's everybody else doing? Looking good, guys. How's the cooking party over there doing? How are you guys doing?
Linda, we should have had a cooking party. We could be drinking wine together.
When I'm not hosting for the library, Debbie. That'll be on private time.
I got the system down. You got to get all your ingredients ready before, and then you can host and cook. I figured out how to do it.
There you go. All right, let me check my water. So my water is boiling. So there's a few things that you can do here. I like to just use a little strainer when I'm done taking my dough out of the pan, my gnocchi out of the pot. You can dump it into a colander, but sometimes I like to save some of that pasta water in case I want to put a little bit in my sauce. I just like adding pasta water, adds a little bit of starchiness, sometimes a little bit of sort of smoothness to a sauce that you're making. So I'll oftentimes just put, when I cook or boil water, I'll just use a little strainer to take the pasta out, especially because these are small. It's not like I'm pulling out like strands of spaghetti that won't stay in here. So I'm just dropping my gnocchi in my pot of water. I'll probably do this in a couple batches just so I don't crowd it too much. And I'm just, a couple at a time, just dropping them right into the water. All right. And when I put the pasta in the water, when you guys get to this part, if you're not there yet, I just like to give it a little stir, make sure they're not sticking to each other, and you want to make sure it's not sticking to the bottom of your pot either. So it's going to go in there. It's going to take about 3 minutes or so, and it's going to just all come to the top and float. You'll notice one at a time they start to pop up, but I like to wait till they all come to the surface. That's how you know they're all cooked, and then I'll just pull them out of the water. So I'm going to do this in batches. So I'm going to cook this for a couple minutes, and then I will add my next batch.
When you put them, when you take them out of the pot, what are you putting them on?
So I'm probably just going to put them right back onto my baking sheet. I'll probably take the parchment paper off. You could throw them in a bowl, throw them on a plate, because they're going to also go back into this pan. I'm going to cook them in a pan to brown them. Now, if I cook them all in one batch, I could probably just scoop them out, put them directly onto a pan, but you want to make sure your pan is heated and your oil is hot before you do that. So because I'm doing mine in 2 batches, I'm not going to heat up my frying pan or my oil just yet. I'll probably start heating it up once I get my second batch of pasta into the water. So I'm just going to throw the pasta right back onto a plate or a tray. It doesn't really matter. These are boiling away. And I got into the habit of always reserving pasta water when I make my pasta and using a little colander or a hand strainer because there were so many times where I was making pasta and I said to myself, make sure you save some of the pasta water, make sure you save some of the pasta water. And then inevitably I take my pot, I walk to the sink and I dump it all in my colander and there goes all my pasta water. So I started getting in a habit of using a little strainer instead, because then by default, I'm leaving the pasta water in the pot. And then if I need it, I have access to it. Pasta water is one of those things when you add to a sauce can really add a lot of elements to it. So for example, we have a penne alla vodka that we do in our studio. And this vodka sauce is super, super, super simple. It's literally shallots, garlic, tomato paste. And then we add pasta water, heavy cream, and Parmesan cheese, and that's it. But the pasta water is really what helps thin it out a little bit, but also add sort of this silky texture, because there's the starchiness of the water that you can't get from any sort of other liquids that you're adding into that sauce. So I really got in the habit of saving the pasta water, so in case I decide I want to add it to my sauce, I always have it on hand. And then if I don't use it, I just dump it.
And you salt the water.
Yes, the water is salted, yes. All right.
Oh,
I have
Okay,
a
you
question
say-
about the boiling. Do you bring it back to a boil and then let it boil for 3 minutes, or is it 3 minutes altogether?
It depends on if it's like a rolling boil, but I don't even put the timer on because I really just, when they all come to the surface, that's how I know they're done.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I'm gonna take mine out now. Was there another question? Actually, I'm just gonna put them in a plate. It's probably a little easier to manage. The bowl. So you'll notice they kind of plump up a little bit when you boil them. But they still look pretty kind of bland. Like they don't look like anything special just yet. But I'm gonna add the rest in there. Give it a little bit of a stir, make sure they're not sticking to the bottom or sticking to each other. And again, it'll probably take about 3 minutes, plus or minus, but once they're all floating, then I know they're done. And I've got my other little ones here. So while these guys are cooking, I'm going to start to heat up my pan, because when I take this and put it on the pan to brown it, I want to make sure I'm putting it on a really hot pan so that it can really crisp up the outside without having to cook for too long, because the pasta's already cooked, it's done. So we don't want to overcook it. We just want to get it in a really hot pan so the outside can sort of sear and get browned pretty quickly. So I'm going to turn my pan on medium light. I'm going to get the pan hot for a minute or so, then I'll add some oil. The oil is going to get really nice and hot, and then probably just in time for me to take this pasta out and throw it all together right into the big non-stick pan. Any questions about the pasta, the water?
Okay,
When
so
you put,
sorry.
when you put them in the pan, do you put all of them in or just half at a time?
Depends
Or
on the size of
on
your
the
pan and how
pan.
much you're making. If you can
Okay.
get them in an even layer without overcrowding and them like stacked on top of each other, you can do it all at once. But if you have too much for that, then you could just do it in batches.
Now in the pan, oil, or is that when you add the butter?
I'm going to use oil to brown them, and then I'm going to take the pasta out of the pan. I'm going to add the butter for the sauce. So I'm going to do the sauce separate and then throw the gnocchi back in just to toss it. So we're browning in oil, and then we'll make the sauce with the butter.
Is the butter salted or unsalted?
So I always buy unsalted butter because that's generally what I use for baking. So I always say unsalted butter. You can use salted butter. You just add a little bit less salt to the sauce when you're finishing it.
How much olive oil do you put in the frying pan?
So it depends on the size of your pan. I probably do 1 to 2 tablespoons.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You got it. All right, these little puppies are done. This pan's getting hot. I'm gonna add some oil. It's funny because I don't ever measure my oil anymore. So now when I actually measure a tablespoon, I'm like, oh, that's how much a tablespoon of oil is. Because I kind of just do a little, you know, once around the pan. All right. All right. Now I've got my oil heating up in my big non-stick pan. You can almost see the oil start to shimmer when it gets hot enough. But for me, I can always smell it. Once I start smelling the oil, then I know it's getting nice and hot. A lot of people like to do the water test. You just flick a little bit of water on it. And if it bubbles up, then you know it's really hot. I can just tell this is hot. So hopefully when I go to put this pasta in, I'll hear a nice sizzle. And that's how I know these are going to start to brown really quickly. There it is. My sizzle. And a lot of people often feel the need when you're browning things to sit there and kind of move it around. But if you really want things to brown, you want to let it sit. Give it a minute, let it really crisp up on the outside, and then try and just gently flip them over. Now, I'm not, again, coming back to me being lazy, efficient, whatever you want to call it, I'm not going to sit here and flip over each individual gnocchi. Now, if you're a perfectionist and you want them all brown really nicely, feel free. Take your time, flip them over. I'm just gonna give my pan a little flick, maybe use a spatula to kind of flip them over, and hope that most of them get browned on both sides.
Do you have the other batch still in the water?
No,
Are you?
I took the other batch out just when I was about to put them in the pan.
Okay, so the whole batch is in there. Okay.
I have a really large frying pan, and again, I only use half of my dough.
Okay.
So it really depends on the size of your pan. If you can fit them in without them overlapping and being too crowded, then you can put it all in at once. Oh, this is looking good. Smells good. One of those things where you wish you can like get the smell through the computer, through the TV. But the best smell of all of this is once the garlic and the butter are in the pan together at the end, that's the best. All right, so this has been in here for about a minute. I'm just gonna start to flip them over a little bit, make sure that I can get a few of these sides browned nicely. And then I'm just gonna let them sit again. There we go. And just to walk through the next few steps. So while this is browning, I'll talk about the sauce. So the sauce is, and this totally optional, you don't have to make a sauce for this. I like to just keep it really simple because I don't think this gnocchi needs much because it's got so much flavor. I'll take, if you're making a full batch, I use a whole stick of butter. I'm using half now, so I'll probably use about a half a stick of butter. But I'm gonna melt a stick of butter in the same pan that I'm using now. And then I'm gonna, once it melts completely and the sort of the foaminess of the butter subsides, then I'm gonna add probably about a clove worth of garlic. So you could chop up fresh garlic, which is always the best way to do it. But I've got jarred minced garlic that I'm gonna use. Again, going back to being super efficient tonight. So if you want, the equivalent of 1 clove is a half of a teaspoon of jarred minced garlic. So if you're making a half batch, you'll do 1 half a teaspoon, a full teaspoon if you want 2 cloves of garlic. So I'm gonna melt the butter, add the garlic. I'll add probably about a quarter to a half of a teaspoon of salt, probably a quarter teaspoon of salt actually, because I'm doing a half batch. I'm gonna cook it, let it simmer, let the flavors kind of mellow a little bit. I'm gonna throw in some fresh basil today. I'm just gonna tear it up and toss it in. Let that get some flavor into the sauce. And then I'm gonna put the gnocchi right in the pan. I'm gonna toss it, and then I'm gonna finish it with about a quarter of a cup of Parmesan cheese. Toss it all together and it's done. It's as simple as that, and you could always top it with more Parmesan cheese, but it's basically a butter garlic sauce with Parmesan cheese to finish. And we're just gonna toss the pasta right back into all of that at the end. So I think these are browning really nicely. Gonna give it one more toss, let them finish. So I'll give you a classic example. So there's one that's browned nicely and one that's not. And you can see the difference. And it just looks so much better, so much more appealing, but also just the textures when you eat it, that crispiness from that brown piece versus this piece right here, kind of looks just like blah, which is why I love to get that really nice golden finish on the outside. Because not only does it add that crispiness, but it's just more appealing. All right, these guys look pretty good. I'm gonna take them out. I'm just gonna stick them in a bowl. The last one, gonna have to eat it. All right, and now I'm gonna let this sit here for a moment. I got my nice hot pan. So I'm gonna add about a half of a stick of butter. And this is the sauce for the gnocchi. So this is how it's gonna get finished. And if you cut your butter into pieces, it will melt more quickly. So I've got some pieces in there. My pan's pretty hot, so it's gonna melt pretty quickly. And once it melts, you'll notice it gets pretty foamy. I don't know if you can see this, but you'll see lots of foam in the pan right now. It's gonna keep cooking and that foam will subside. The foam kind of goes away. And once that foam kind of goes away, I'm gonna add garlic. So I'm gonna use a half of a teaspoon of garlic. And again, I've just got jarred minced garlic. If you wanna chop up some fresh garlic, I encourage you to do so.
It looks like, and you had the butter out. It looked like it was already at room temperature.
It was actually pretty soft from sitting next to the pan.
Mm-hmm.
I'm adding some salt right now too, just make sure I don't forget. And butter is pretty much melted. I'm gonna give it another minute for that foam to subside. Now, if you wanted to go crazy here and you could keep cooking your butter, you get a brown butter and you get all these little brown bits in there that would really taste, they complement the flavor of the sweet potato really well. But you don't want to try and gamble with making brown butter today. You can just cook your butter, let it melt, let the foam kind of disappear a bit, and then just add the garlic. Garlic can burn very quickly, so I usually only give it like a minute once it's in here. And I'm gonna throw in some basil. And this, I'm just gonna tear up with my hands if I can open my package. You can chop it, you can chiffonade it, you can do whatever you'd like. If you had some fresh herbs that you wanted to throw in. I'm just gonna very roughly just tear it up and put it in my pan. And putting it right into the butter is gonna really help that flavor of whatever herb you're using, if you're using anything, kind of get infused into the butter. All right. That's really good. Now I'm just gonna take my gnocchi, toss it right back in my pan, just to get it tossed in that butter sauce. And the last finish is gonna be some Parmesan cheese. So I'm gonna do about 1/4 cup here. And I'm gonna toss it all together. And this is the part where you'll really regret not using a nonstick pan if you throw Parmesan cheese into that hot pan with all the other ingredients. Just gonna give this a toss. Oh my goodness. Smell-o-vision, I wish we had it. I'm just gonna pour it right back into this bowl because I want you guys to see this a little bit closer. But this, get the really nice golden bits of gnocchi, get the nice contrast of color of the basil. Everything's coated really nicely in Parmesan cheese. And then if you wanted to just do the last little sprinkle finish on top. There you go, there's dinner. So I'm not sure if everybody's up to the same stage, but I love the contrast of the green. So whether it's sage or basil or some other fresh herb you have on hand or you love using when you're cooking, it definitely adds a nice pop of color to an otherwise pretty uniform looking dish, with the exception of the nice browning of the gnocchi. But there it is. How is everybody doing? I see some empty cameras. Hopefully that means people are very busy finishing off their gnocchi.
I'm browning. Did you put cheese in the sauce or it was just butter?
I did. I added, after the butter and garlic were all set, I threw the pasta back in and then I threw Parmesan cheese on top and tossed it all together. So the cheese kind of melts into it.
No, that means you're gonna come back in 5 seconds.
I'm gonna take a little taste of mine. I take a little crunchy one.
I'm sorry, I lost you. So you just tossed the cheese in after you took it out?
I put cheese in the pan.
Okay.
So I had the butter and the garlic. I threw my basil in. I threw the pasta in, and then I threw the cheese in right with the pasta and tossed it all together.
Okay.
And then you can always toss it with a little bit more, but I like to put it in with the butter and the gnocchi in the pan because it really helps like coat it all really evenly and almost melt into it. How's everybody else doing? I see Debbie over by her stove.
So I made the sauce in a separate pan. So should I just now dump it into the pan with the gnocchi or?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay.
Either way,
Sorry.
one into the other. Have you guys tried yours? I see some of you tasting. Is it good? How'd it come out? Awesome. I see a thumbs up.
There's a serious batching of going on in one of those houses. Whew, that's a lot of gnocchi going.
It's delicious.
Awesome.
I don't have a nonstick pan, so I will be sorry, but it'll be okay. It will be okay.
If you get your oil nice and hot, hopefully it won't stick too much. And maybe you want to mix the Parmesan cheese in out of your pan because the Parmesan cheese is the kicker.
Okay, I'll do.
That's what'll get your pan.
Perfect, thanks.
You're welcome. Any questions from our active watchers, people that aren't participating but just kind of watching along? All right. I can't wait to see how the rest of these come out.
We should have done this on a Monday for a meatless Monday.
I've never actually eaten or made gnocchi, so this is like huge for me.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I love it, because it's like so many people are like, I'm not making gnocchi. What are you, crazy? But it's really like, it's not that complicated. I mean, it takes some finessing to get the dough right, but once you get there, you know, there's not a lot of ingredients. It's not a lot of work. It's pretty quick. You don't have to let the dough rest. You don't have to knead it for 20 minutes. You don't need a machine.
I don't know. I look at the bag and I'm overwhelmed, so forget that.
Yeah.
So this is actually kind of easy for me.
Yes, I'm glad you think so.
I did make gnocchi with my leftover mashed potatoes.
That's a good little hack. That's a good trick when you have leftover mashed potatoes, because then you don't have to do the hard part.
Oh, that is a good trick. So now what would you, I have leftover mashed potatoes floating around in my fridge. So just add a little, they've already got the cream and garlic in it, so.
I need to step back.
Okay, I'm done. Do you want to see it? I don't know if
Yes,
you-
please. Oh, wow. Look at that, Debbie. Nice. Did you
That's
taste
just-
it?
I just made half of it.
Did you taste it yet?
No.
That's the real test. Now, they look great.
My kitchen looks like a bomb went off in it.
Yeah, you guys have a front and center view of my mess.
Well, we were coming off the middle school cooking.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, we had different kids cooking today.
Yeah. And for some reason, I decided to like try a new lemon chicken recipe. I'm not sure it was a great day for that. Here's mine. I'm going to add the Parmesan cheese.
Oh, there
Not
it
to
is.
eat.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Definitely don't do the Parmesan cheese in the pan if it's not
Oh,
done.
I forgot to do the cheese.
Nope, I'm not. I'm with you. I got it.
Oh, Susie, those look great too.
And then what do I do? Just mix it up, I guess,
Yeah,
right?
just toss it. Yep.
All right. Look at that. I'm so proud of myself.
Have you tasted it yet? Gotta give it a try.
Yeah, I tasted it when it was just plain without the garlic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm not sure I like it with the garlic, so I wanted to taste it before and then after, you know? A little bit of a plain eater. But
That is so much gnocchi. Oh my goodness, that table. I love it. It's amazing. Awesome.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Really good.
I'm glad
I
you
drowned
say
it
like
in-
you surprised yourself.
Because I don't cook stuff like this ever.
That's the whole point. It takes you out of your comfort zone.
That's right. So did those scones.
And those came out great too.
Those were awesome.
I'm so glad. Baby steps. You'll be like whipping up dinner for like the neighborhood soon enough, Debbie.
I don't know. But the kids class is the right speed for me.
Came out really good.
oh yeah. Oh yeah, that garlic sauce is
Very
fantastic.
good.
Oh, see, so you surprise yourself. You like the garlic. Good.
I do.
Awesome.
I have to agree with you, Debbie. I love those scones. I never thought I'd be able to make them.
Yeah, that was hard, but those were good.
Yeah.
And I just, when we made the muffins, I put most of them in the freezer and I just finished them the other day.
Oh, yum.
But now I want more.
Well, now you have the recipe.
Mhm. So now,
Sorry, go ahead.
so if you're gonna have this for lunch tomorrow, which I'm planning to,
Yes.
I have a pretty good sized bowl here. I only used half my dough. Would you microwave it? Would you put it in the refrigerator and then microwave it?
Yeah, I honestly, I try not to microwave things when I can avoid it, just because I prefer it. Now I have an air fryer. I literally just got it 2 weeks ago. I use it for everything. But in the absence of like an air fryer and having to throw in an oven, just put it in the microwave. But what I would do is just take it out of the fridge and let it come a little closer to room temperature before you put it in the microwave, so you don't have to microwave it as long.
Okay.
Isn't the air fryer amazing?
Oh my gosh.
I use it every time I cook, I use it.
My husband was like, we don't need any more kitchen gadgets. I'm like, but I keep hearing amazing things about this air fryer. And I get home from, cooking and doing classes all day. The last thing I want to do is start making a new meal from scratch. So the air fryer, I mean,
No.
I feel like being in the kitchen. It's like the easiest thing in the world.
I actually have 2 of them because I'm on my 3rd because the first one my daughter got me for Mother's Day was way too small for us.
Yeah.
So I gave that one, I ended up giving it to her and getting a bigger one. And then for my birthday, I got the Cuisinart. That's a toaster oven, air fryer.
Nice. Yeah.
And because our toaster oven was dying and I was supposed to get rid of the old air fryer, but I kept it because there's nights I want to make a vegetable in one and a potato in the other.
That's nice.
And
if you have those, you don't even need an oven. I mean, like it completely replaces the need unless you're, baking, but
yeah,
it's great. And it's so much more efficient.
So the one that you got with the, so do you like the Cuisinart combo one?
I like it a lot. Yeah.
Okay, because I know my toaster oven is like, I'm shocked it's still alive. So I figured the next gadget I would get would be the combo,
Cheryl, I have both, and I like both for different reasons.
You have a regular and then a toaster oven one?
Yeah, I find the one that's like a bucket, we just throw it in the dishwasher, so it's easier to clean. And like when you make a lot of chicken nuggets, when it gets on the bottom of the toaster oven, it isn't as easy to clean.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. The bucket, the egg-shaped one is, that's a lot easier to clean.
Okay.
Like the one I see in Casey's. But my sister got an attachment that goes on her Instant Pot that's air frying.
Yeah.
But she doesn't use it that much. Like I think the one I got is easier to use.
Well, I mean, that attachment for the Instapot is just as much, it's like you're almost there at a regular, you're almost at the price of an air fryer. Pretty much.
Yeah, I think
mine at Macy's for like $35. You like look for one of their day sales. They're not expensive.
That one?
The egg one, and they have them at Macy's, and I've had it for 3 years now.
What, the Instapot attachment?
No, just the air fryer.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm saying, yeah. Like, I'd rather get that than, like, my Instapot attachment, yeah.
I made, it was like chicken Parmesan in the air fryer. It was a skinny taste recipe. And it came out amazing. It's not, you don't put sauce on it. You put you air fry like cherry tomatoes and olive oil and garlic. And then you do the chicken and then you put, melt the cheese and then put the tomatoes on top. It was so good. I surprised myself with that one.
Another one, huh?
You're a cook, Deb. You didn't realize it.
Yep.
Right.
We've unleashed the cook in you.
But I don't have an air fryer yet. Now you guys are talking me into it. I think
I've had mine for less than a month, and my husband is finally like, I'm so glad you got this thing, because he's anti anything that clutters the kitchen.
Yeah.
But he loves it. Oh, can I come to that party? That looks good.
I want to see the gnocchi when that group is working hard over there.
Yes.
Well, with that though, I do think I would like to thank Casey for her time. I think most of us did get to a point. If there's any more questions for Casey, as you're cooking, or do you all feel comfortable? It seems like a lot of you that word cooking have actually gone through to the other side. Oh, and it's looking good.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
So now do I just dump this pasta water? I'm done, right?
Yeah, you don't need the pasta water.
Okay.
Every now and then I'll throw a splash in my sauce, but I didn't use any of it today.
All right, just making sure before I dump it.
How long can you keep pasta water in your fridge?
That's a good question. I don't think I've ever kept it in the fridge. I don't even know. Does it separate? I've never actually tried doing that. Oh, it's a good question though.
Yeah, I've never heard of it either, but more and more recipes, what you're showing is getting the strainer from, I've just been using, like tongs to go back and forth. But again, I think I do it now enough that I'm doing the strainer.
Yeah.
And it kind of saves you from bringing the pot
Just like that
to
one.
your sink, and then you're bringing the strainer back, and it's
just, yeah. And once you go to put it in the strainer, like you forget and you just dump all the water.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's something I've been working on doing.
Yes.
But again, any other questions? Because Casey, thank you very much. Like I said, this will be on YouTube because I'm going to look at it because I'm going to be making this tomorrow night.
There you go.
Thank you, Casey.
Where are my guinea pigs?
Well, thank you for having me. This was a ton of fun.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Thank you.
I missed most of this, but where is the recipe?
Thank you.
It's very interesting in the
Thank you.
advertisement. The recipe.
Susan, I emailed you the recipe.
Oh, the recipe.
That was part of the email.
Okay, I'll look for it. Thank you.
Okay, all right, let me know if you don't have it, I'll give
I'll
it
try to get to the next one earlier.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Casey. And,
Thank you. Take care.
good night.